What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, got another scouting Steelers video. We're going to be talking about Oregon center Jackson Powers Johnson. I've seen all the mentions. I've seen all the comments. Thank you guys so much for the input. I know a lot of you all are very anxious to, hear my thoughts on this player. Really fun player, man. Awesome prospect. I'm really excited to talk about him in this video. We went over Duke offensive lineman, probably transitioned into center yesterday on the channel. And then, a lot of other things kind of coming up in the next couple of days as we head into the NFL draft cycle. Tomorrow night on Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be doing some mock draft simulations. So I'm going to be going through some mock drafts live here on the channel. So I'll get you guys in the comments. We'll talk some ball, kind of go through some different mock draft scenarios for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm really excited about that. That's something I know a lot of you guys are really interested in. I know y'all love the mock draft, so I wanted to, give you guys a chance to, come hang out. We'll go through some scenarios and simulations. So, and then in case you missed it, on Thursday and Friday of next week, before the NFL draft kicks off, I'll be streaming on my channel as well. So make sure you set your reminders, all that good stuff. I think we're going to kick it off on Thursday around 6 p.m. Eastern, but it's just going to be really laid back for them. You got questions on draft prospects. We'll talk Steelers. We'll talk draft, different things that, it's going to be a really interesting weekend. I'm excited to, talk ball and give you guys plenty of content throughout the weekend. So really excited about those things. Just before we get started into Jackson Powers Johnson scouting report, we'll go over strengths, weaknesses, some numbers, my grade kind of projection to the next level, and talk about his fit within the Steelers offense. Just please do me a favor, like the video, subscribe, drop me a comment, all that good stuff. Helps support the channel, helps everything grow, and I really appreciate it on my end. Thank you so much. So let's talk about Jackson Powers Johnson, man. One of the very few underclassmen in this entire class. This is a relatively older group in general, but Powers Johnson is a junior. He's a one-year starter at Oregon. He's going to be 21 years old throughout the entirety of his rookie season. So it's a really young player, still very early on his development track. Just looking at some testing numbers, Powers Johnson was working back from an injury, so he didn't get to do all of the testing, but he kind of weighed in a shade over 6'3". He was 328 pounds. He did 30 reps on the bench. Pretty good size, grade. If you guys follow like Kent Lee Platt, Math Bomb, definitely recommend that as a useful tool throughout the draft process. He jumped 32 inches in the vert, and that's pretty fantastic for an offensive lineman, and then jumped over 8 feet in the broad jump as well. Again, I don't even think he was fully healthy when he was doing that stuff. So, really, really nice numbers there. His arms came in a shade over 32 inches, which is a little bit below average for the center position. But, those are pretty much all the testing measurables that we have. Like I said, he was working back through an injury, so he didn't do everything. But so last year was Powers Johnson's first year, starting at Oregon. That was his first year ever really playing center. So really impressive, resume for him to be able to put himself on the map for the NFL draft landscape with just 1 year of tape. But you just kind of look at it. He played over 800 snaps last year, 497 passing snaps. He gave up one pressure, 0 sacks. On paper, that's pretty outstanding, man. You just look at his like underlying metrics according to PFF and all that stuff. Really, really good. Oregon, they asked him, it was a little over 100 true pass sets, which isn't a ton. Like I said, it's a pretty small sample size across the board, but Oregon's run scheme was pretty varied. They run some inside zone, some outside zone, a lot of gap stuff. So he's done a little bit of everything, kind of well-versed in the run game world. Just some pros, in his scouting report. I have a ton of notes on him because honestly, he's one of my favorite prospects that I've watched in the entire class, to be honest with you. But he's got a thick frame. He'll be one of the heaviest centers in the NFL upon arrival. I mean, this dude is a 328-pound center. A lot of these guys coming out now, they're a shade over 300 pounds. This dude's he's a thick boy, and you can really see it like throughout his frame. I mean, he's a little powder keg, man. But he's an outstanding athlete for his size. He moves extremely well for 328 pounds. Honestly, the first couple of games that I watched, I wasn't really familiar with him. Like I said, he wasn't really a name that was on my radar over the summer or anything like that. First game I watched, I couldn't believe that he was 330 pounds. I thought he was like 300, just the way that he was moving. He's a heat-seeking missile on the move and in space. His straight line speed shows up on screens, perimeter runs. There are some absolutely freakish plays of him getting out in space, getting to the second and third level on screens, and just flattening poor, linebackers, defensive backs, just running them over, flipping over them, all that stuff. He has a type of athleticism, I feel like, that you can really weaponize on offense. He's got good quickness off the ball, a really powerful upper body, man. Good grip strength. He's capable of torquing defenders out of the way. He can easily toss, defensive ends. out of the way on run plays. He's excellent on down blocks. Just from like a mentality and how he's wired, I really appreciate, just the way that he plays. He plays like a pest. Like that was the number one thing that I kept coming back to. Like, man, I would hate to go up against this guy. He's consistently trying to agitate opponents. You consistently see him, trying to give guys a little something extra after the play. He's got a finisher's mentality. Like I said, especially like when you get to see him get to the second and third level, this dude is looking to run through people's faces and end lives. And I really appreciate that from an offensive lineman. That's the type of guy that I want at the pivot. In pass protection, I think he's got solid lateral agility to mirror quicker rushing threats and identify things that are coming through the A gap. He's got a really quality ankle to halt power as well. He's pretty efficient in that regard. Usually only takes him about kind of one hop step to kind of halt that stuff off. So like I said, his lower body really pretty strong. He's got a nice base to him as well. Football IQ, understanding of the game in general was something that I wanted to make note of in the scouting report, especially for somebody that just hasn't played a lot of ball. Like he's only played one season at center. But the things that I saw him do on tape, just recognizing different twists, different stunts, it almost seemed like he was seeing things in slow motion. And that was really impressive to me because I think it shows off, the football IQ, but also, the film study, just being aware of, how to communicate, how to pass things off with his teammates. This dude was consistently looking for work in pass pro. I really appreciate that too. There's a lot of times where you're going up against those 4-man fronts on the defensive line where the center's uncovered. You want that guy to, make sure that, you're not getting blitzing threats from the second level, but also like go to help his teammates. And I felt like that not only was he going over to kind of give some, jabs to people's ribs and things like that, but I felt like he was kind of covering up for some mistakes along the offensive line, like where guys would get beaten, he would kind of come over and recover and, give the quarterback plenty of time to throw the football. So in pass pro, really liked a lot of what I saw there. He's really heavy-handed. He's got a nasty demeanor and physicality that's off the charts. I mean, a lot of those things that you look for in offensive linemen that are the cliche, quote-unquote, terms that offensive line coaches preach. Like this dude has it and has it in spades. So just some of the negatives in his scouting report, man, to be honest with you, there's not a lot of them. All right. Like I know I sound really bullish on the player, but, I am extremely high on Jackson Powers Johnson. I just don't see a lot of, I don't really see any negative flaw, or there are negatives to his game. I don't see any fatal flaws in his profile, aside from one thing that's not really necessarily like football related. But the consistent theme I saw on tape was he does play a little bit tall, which is kind of odd because he's only about 6'3", which is like average-ish height for a center. But he does play tall in his stance, so occasionally give up his chest. He's not a natural knee bender, and I do think that kind of sacrifices his leverage a little bit, especially where I felt like it hurt his ability to sustain blocks at a high level, putting too much stress kind of on his upper body to kind of just torque defenders out of the way. He wasn't really sticking on blocks as well as I thought he could have, if he got a little bit lower. And bend his knees a little bit better. Like I said, man, but I think some of the stuff about, I've read some stuff on Twitter. I don't really read like other people's scouting reports a ton throughout the process, but I see people like talking about some concerns like with his hand usage or, that he's a little bit erratic with his technique and stuff like that. I just don't really see that, man. Like, I think he's the most like technically refined guy with his hands that I've ever seen? No. But I also think that it's important context to note that this player has only been playing the position for one season. And I think that if you take that into account, the hand usage and stuff was really good. Like I said, there are times where he gives up his chest. I think there are reps where offensive linemen do that pretty much on a game-by-game basis. It wasn't like something that I talked about with Grant Barton, where he was just consistently having wide hand placement. And he was late with his hands, giving up his chest sometimes as much as like a half dozen or a dozen times a game. This is like 1 to 2 reps a game where I felt like he was really just giving up his chest to rusher. So, the big thing for him, I feel like, there was only 16 career starts on offense. 13 of those, I think, came this past season. So there's just not a lot of body of work, not a ton of experience. And that's not something that necessarily shows in his play, but it is a notable part of his scouting report. He did have 5 false starts in 2023. He is a guy that he likes to show off his quickness off the ball. There are times where he can sometimes like overrun plays or, overset or things like that. But I think the false starts are probably something that, can be worked on. Not too concerned about, but it is something to watch at the next level because, you definitely don't want to, be drawing a bunch of penalty flags because that'll, put your offense behind schedule. The injury history to me is the biggest concern. And like, I'm not a doctor. So, like, just full disclosure on how I do my grading and evaluations. I don't put a ton of stock into like injury concerns because like I don't have access to people's medical reports, and even if I did, I wouldn't know how to read them. I do always try to make note of when information is public. I want to make note of that in my process and make sure that people are informed. And I try to keep that in the back of my head when I'm evaluating these players, but it's not something that I put a ton of like stock into my grading. But if you look at the Athletic, Dane Brugler, his beast draft guide is like, it's excellent, especially for the evaluation part, which I know you guys probably already know about, but it has tons of nuggets in there about like how these people are wired, like personal info and all that off the field stuff that's really important. That's really primarily what I use it for more than anything else. But he battled hip and groin injuries in 2023. Dane said that is, I assume what prevented him from doing all of the testing. I think that was what was kind of holding him back in that regard. But he's also suffered multiple concussions. Multiple concussions to me is a red flag. I mean, that's something that you definitely don't want to see on a player's profile before they even get to the NFL level. That's a really scary thing, especially for a position in the trenches that is going to be involved in a lot more like impact plays than you would see like if it was a receiver where you're only going into those collisions on a handful of times a game. I mean, these offensive linemen, they're in those close quartered combat collisions basically every single snap. So that's definitely something that I want to take note of. And I don't know how teams are going to view that, how they're going to grade that. I can't really speak to that, but I agree that it's probably a concern. It's not something that I take a ton into my grading, but just kind of the synopsis that I had for him. His competition level like wasn't outstanding. I didn't feel like he was really tested often from a physical or just like a skill standpoint, but I felt like he dominated every single game I watched. I mean, I went back and watched before the Senior Bowl. I watched 3 games, I think, in full. And then I watched recently over the past week or so, I've probably watched clips of another full game and then clips from several others. And I just feel like he dominated pretty much every single game that I watched. And that's something that matters to me, man. Like if you want to be in contention to be, the first player off the board at this position, I want to see a dominant player. And I feel like I did see a dominant player on tape. I think it's combination of athletic and physicality to go with like that tone setting mentality is extremely exciting. I mean, I think that those are all things that you definitely look for in a player. If you're going to take a player high within the top 50 picks of the draft, or if you're going to take a center in the first round of the draft, you want them to be an outstanding athlete, in my opinion, because not only is that athleticism, I mean, that's going to translate to the next level. You're going to be going up against the best athletes in the world, but I also think it speaks to, some of the upside that he has. I think he's a day one starter who's already a good player, in my opinion, but he also has a good bit of upside and real Pro Bowl potential at the pivot, in my opinion. There's nothing in his profile I think that's overly alarming in terms of how he's going to how his game's going to translate. I just think he's a pretty clean prospect, man. I know I feel like he's lost a little bit of steam throughout the draft process. I'm not sure if it's that the injury stuff coming out. I know there's some other things about like his personality. I mean, I talked to the guy in Indianapolis. He does have like that very energetic kind of infectious personality, and I do feel like you see that on tape. Like I said, he's a pest. He's an agitator. So I'm not sure. Like maybe there's some stuff in interviews on how he's came off. I mean, there's no reason for me to be like concerned about something like that from like where I sit, but maybe that's part of the reason. I just don't see how I don't see how people, couldn't fall in love with this dude's tape and what he offers. But I think, he's got a relatively easier transition to the pros than a guy like Graham Barton does, even if I think that Barton might have slightly more upside just because I think Barton is a elite athlete. I mean, I know he tested like an elite athlete, but he's definitely one of the top athletes. I feel like we just don't see guys like that can transition to the interior on a yearly basis. And I think Powers Johnson's a very good athlete and is elite, especially like once he gets out in space. But I do feel like Barton's a little bit more athletic. So if you want to shoot for the stars and take a guy like that, then I wouldn't be upset about that. But I have those guys kind of in the same tier. I always like to like tier players too whenever I'm kind of putting together a big board or giving my evaluations or positional rankings. I like to try to like put those out in tiers, not to like hedge my bet, but more so like saying like this is the caliber of player. Like I think that both of these guys can be very good starters at the next level with a good amount of upside. And I have them in the same tier, even if I kind of do prefer or slightly lean Powers Johnson, because I just look at the tape that he put up with the 1 year of starting experience at Oregon. I just think it's going to be an easier transition. Like, I'm not as worried about his hand placement and some of the pass pro deficiencies as I was with Barton. And then I just think, with Barton, there's a ton of upside. But he's going to have to get used to snapping the football again. He hasn't done that since 2020. So when you're comparing those two players, and I'm bringing these two guys up because I just did the video on Barton yesterday, the day before. So I wanted to give you guys I know a lot of people asking the questions how I had those guys ranked and all that stuff. But both really good players. I would be excited about getting either one of them really to Pittsburgh, and I like Zach Frazier as well. I'll be trying to do a video on him over the weekend and give you guys my full thoughts on his game in a similar format. But I think that. Can you take a center in the first round? I want an elite athlete if I'm going to do that. I want somebody with a lot of upside because I think you have to be one of the best players at your position in order to go in the first round if you don't play a premium position. Like I think back to like some of the conversations I've had on Twitter. A good lesson that I kind of learned was premier player versus premier position. If you're a premier player at non-premium positions, I think that still carries value, and you can make the case to pick those guys in the first round or the later part of the first round, which is where the Steelers would be picking. Of course, I would prefer. I'm team trade back. Spoiler alert: I've said that throughout the really the process. I think the Steelers could afford to trade back a couple slots and pick up an extra day 2 pick. That would be my preferred route. But if the Steelers did that and scooped one of these guys in the first round, like I couldn't complain a ton about it. So that's just my general thoughts. But yeah, I really like Jackson Powers Johnson as a player. He's going to end up being a top 20 player, I believe, on my big board. He is as of right now. I've still got a couple more evaluations to go through, hoping to release my big board and my offensive line rankings here in the next probably 2 days or so. So I'm really excited about that. Just as a reminder, again, 7 Eastern tomorrow night, we're going to be doing mock draft simulations on the channel. And then I'll be streaming before the first 2 nights of the NFL draft. We're going to kick off things at 6 p.m. on Thursday. So set your reminders. Let me know if you guys are going to be there. Drop me a comment on what you guys think of JPJ, what y'all thought of the video. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. As always, I really appreciate your all support, and I'm really excited about the next 10 days. Going to be a lot of content on the channel on SteelersNow.com. So if you guys are ready for that type of stuff, just make sure y'all come holler at me. So I appreciate y'all.